And welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am James Just, and with me today is Jason McPhee from the Knuckleheads of Liberty. And Jason, we're talking today about the abuse of police power. Abuse police of power. I can say this, right? I swear to God, it's at the end of these days. These live shows always get me at the end of the day. All right. So the police had a raid on a Marion County newspaper and their
this is in Kansas, right?
Kansas,
yeah.
Marion County, Kansas. They raided a newspaper office and the homes of the reporters to get cell phones, computers, and all the various stuff that you need to put together a newspaper. And essentially they only did it because they were mad that the newspaper said bad things about them. Essentially is what would happen. And this is not new. We had the same thing happen here, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago here in California. We had something similar down in the Bay Area, a very similar case. And so we're seeing this more and more often where, again, we've talked about next week, how we're living under rules that I would have thought 30 years ago would not have been possible here, right? Under the type of just authoritarian decisions that our whole culture is seemingly turning authoritarian, and the police abuse is just kind of the easiest topic to see, right?
Well, it almost feels like they're taking their cues from the national government. I mean, look at Julian Assange, essentially reported on something that the government felt was inconvenient. And, this man is, essentially a hero showing us things our government has done that our government does not want us to know about and that we should know about. I mean, essentially the idea that our government there was footage that, at least in one case, I guess there's several things that WikiLeaks showed, but one of them was this issue of reporters being killed in a war zone, by, I believe, an American crew. I think they were in a helicopter or something, but it shows them doing a double tap and laughing about it on the tape. And it's just horrifying. And, for things like this, Assange is being persecuted. And, that's just good reporting.
Yeah.
That's what freedom of the press is all about. And the idea that this man has been having to be in exile and now in custody for the last, I don't know what, has it been, how many years has it been now that Assange has been...
Well, this was under
2015, roughly, or something?
Yeah, it's almost been a decade. It's been almost a decade since this whole thing has been going on, and this is just kind of the first symptom of the problem, right? When the press rolled over for Assange, they set this up, did they not? When they set this kind of thing up, so now, if the press isn't going to protect Julian Assange, then why are they going to protect some little, newspaper, some small newspaper in flyover country? Yeah. Why is anybody but us going to care? And that's what these police and their backers, it's not just the police, remember, this is for politicians. Police, politics, politicians, you have the same root word, right? We live in a strange time where we have people who will ask politicians to enact policy that need policing, and then they'll go, well, I don't understand why this is political. Well, what part of not political do you not understand? And so it's just a strange thing. And as you said, the question is, who pays the consequences? Because in this Marion County, the owner of that newspaper, she passed away because of the stress. And at some point, somebody's going to sue, right? Because this is clearly an egregious...
Yeah. The owner, apparently, they raided her house, and so I guess they were going through her son's stuff, and I guess they took her computer so that she couldn't do her own social media stuff, which I guess it sounded like she had her own podcast or television show or something like that. And I guess she was in her 90s, and so she passed away, with all this stress. And it's just like, well, that's how much the government cares for you that much. They're going to bust into your house.
They don't care about you. And the thing is, because they don't pay the consequences, right? Because they will get sued, they will lose, but it's the taxpayer that's going to pay. It's not the police. It's not any of the people who did any of these things. It's not the prosecutor or the judge who okayed it. None of them are going to pay a dime. They're not going to. They won't have. Maybe at absolute worst, they'll get a thing in their record that said one time they did something wrong. At worst, right? Well, it's not even a slap on the wrist. It's a slap on the wrist with a wet noodle. But the taxpayer, they're going to have to pay this bill.
Yeah.
And so the taxpayers are getting used twice, essentially, in this situation, right? They're getting abused by the police, and then they're going to get abused by the court system and the politicians, because they're going to have to pay off of this egregious, this will get sued and they will lose. It's just the will lose. And
this is the crazy thing is that, when you have the more and more things you put on government, the more and more chances you're going to have to violate people's rights. And of course, who's going to pay for it? It's going to be me and you. Ultimately, it won't be the public official who actually did it, which, is so backwards. But, this is the problem, right, of putting all this stuff on government. I mean, the real solution is just keep government simple and transparent. Don't put a lot of things under their belt, and then we can all keep a good eye on them and make sure that, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Well, there is some good news in that, in at least places outside of the United States. Argentina they're angling towards a more libertarian future. They had their presidential primary just last week, and the Libertarian won the largest percentage, won like 30%. The current ruling party won like 24%, and the next one was 23%. So there's a runoff coming in October to see who's actually going to be the president. But a libertarian president, I think his party is the Party of Freedom or something like that. I forget exactly what the phrase is, but it's a libertarian party. He wants to get rid of the central bank, which of course got all kinds of people up in arms. Of course, which is kind of strange. He wants to get rid of his central bank and he wants to go onto the dollar. So, but all things are relative, right?
Well, and the issue is they have over 100% inflation, annual inflation going on in that country right now, with the Argentinian peso, I guess is what their currency is. In some cases, maybe it's just about taking it out of local politicians' hands so that, at least they can't decide to make spending decisions. Now, it's true, the U.S. government could water down their currency a little bit, but at least it cuts down some of the irrational spending anyways.
It helps. Again, it's like I was talking to some libertarians last night about it, and he said they were talking about it's kind of strange, we didn't understand it. I said, well, you got to understand all things are relative. Right, the dollar's a better option than his peso. It doesn't mean it's a great option. It just means for what choices he realistically has. Mm-hmm. He's got to make a choice, and so they don't have the resources to go to gold, so they've got to have to go to the dollar, or they're going to have to go like something like the brick, which is going to be a disaster. And so their choice is realistically his other choice is the dollar at the moment, until there's a more market option, which, quite frankly, might appear now that we have places like Argentina who will be willing to invest, who are willing to use these options as they come up. Because, the other governments have been cracking down on things like Bitcoin, have been cracking down on the other options. So now that there's a place that might explore those other options, there may be actually an opportunity down the road for those options to become options.
Yeah. One thing to at least tamper our hopes up just a little bit is that he won't have a huge amount of support, I guess, within the government, because it's like he will be sort of a lone wolf, I guess, in there.
Yeah, he'll be the president. Yeah, because it's not the parliament, what they call it. Their governing bodies will be largely the other parties, right?
Yeah,
because that election happens later. Yeah. And so, or happened a couple of years ago, and the way cycles work, right? So he's going to have to be the power of the bully pulpit for a little while. But the hope is that once you win, then win at that top level, winning down the road becomes easier.
Yeah, and get the message out. And he is an actual economist too. So this isn't like just electing some yahoo out of nowhere. I mean, this guy is steeped in libertarian ideas of economics, and that's important stuff, and he can do a lot to promote the messages, I guess, of why it matters to sort of decentralize that power and to have bottom-up solutions instead of top-down solutions. So,
and I think what might be an interesting discussion for a minute is is to kind of figure out how Argentina got to this place, right? Because the political history of Argentina is these massive swings, right, between right and left, far right, far left. And so now they're at least prepared. There's at least 30% of them that are prepared to choose something different. And so, maybe those massive swings people are just finally getting tired of those massive swings and want to find something that's more stable. And, the one thing about a libertarian philosophy is it has the potential to be much more stable than these other ones, because we're not asking the government to do a lot of things, and then, when someone else gets an offer, we're going to ask the government to do a bunch of different things, and so it's a much more stable system, right, when the government is smaller.
Yeah, and it should be. I mean, the idea of letting us be free to do what we want with our own lives, that should be a relatively stable thing. The idea that somebody else isn't reaching into your home to tell you what you should be doing, that should be the ideal, but unfortunately, the way the press paints it, it's like, this guy, they call him far right. I mean, the guy literally wants you to be free, and you're labeling him far right, whatever that means. Usually it's I guess it's the left's dog whistle that you're a racist or something, or you're
I'm not
a
even
Nazi
sure what,
or something else.
Yeah, I'm not even sure what the heck the far right. They're calling them the far right. It was hilarious. The headline I saw, the far right. What? Libertarians don't even fit on this left and right political spectrum. But if you're going to force us on this political spectrum, how far left do you have to be to call a libertarian far right? That's saying far more about where you're standing than it is about where the other people are standing.
Yeah, well, I mean, and to me, the fact that we're absolutists on free speech. Now, do you consider that to be far right nowadays?
Is that far right or far left? We're extremists on personal freedom. Are we far left or are we far right?
We tell people you own your body. That's far right now? Just okay.
I don't know. I think it's because we want the government smaller. So the left sees us as extremists, and so the only thing they know is far right. They just don't know any better. They don't know anything else, and so that's how they label it.
Kind of like with the climate debate. You're a denier, if you don't go along with them on everything they want to do.
or ask a question. It's funny. 20 years ago, I will digress. 20 years ago, I was part of this movement that's wanted the climate scientists. All we wanted them to do was acknowledge that they're not including the solar variation and it matters. We actually completely understood that they didn't have the technology to measure it. We just wanted them to acknowledge that solar output varies, and it's stupid to say it's a constant, right? It's just unscientific. Well, eventually, 10 years later, they finally admitted, they finally started including solar variation into their calculations. Well, but they never went back and said, we apologize for all those names we called you guys. You guys, we're sorry for that. We got carried away. Never once. Didn't say that. And so now one of the things we're part of is we're going, our electromagnetic field is weakening and moving, and that's going to have some type of impact on our climate. Don't know what it's going to be. Right? We're not pretending that we know what the impact is, but you can't lose 15% of your strength of your shield and not have it have some impact. And you can't have that shield move and the places, it's going to have some impact. Don't know what it is, but it's going to have some impact. Can we study that? No, you're crazy. Can't do anything. It's like, you're killing me.
Well, this is what is kind of crazy, is that, if you look at what the IPCC actually puts out, that's the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change,
yeah.
And in their reports, there is a lot of uncertainty that they acknowledge. I mean, they acknowledge that there is feedbacks from clouds that have a lot of unknown, possibilities here, because, essentially when you get clouds cover, that reflects a lot of the light back out into space, which, changes slightly what they call the albedo of the Earth and stuff. So there's a lot of, uncertainties that are going on. I mean, certainly the basic concept of a gas trapping heat is certainly sound, but they acknowledge that there's a lot of uncertainty. But the people who are pushing policy act like you've got 10 years to deal with this or the game over. Right?
They take the most extreme climate model they can find, and they say that's the one that's going to happen when that has never happened.
Yeah.
And so that's the problem with that.
Well, and they pick little children, too, to be their spokespeople, and then they get angry and they say, I'm very upset with you. And so you're going to be eating bugs for the next 50 years.
Because we're mad at you. Yeah. In 50 years, though, but they'll be saying bugs are bad to eat. You're going to have to eat, I don't know, soy ain't green.
Yeah. There you go. Can I get the bugs, please?
Yeah, can we get the bugs back? Okay, so federal workers, we're going to move on. Federal workers down in San Francisco have been told to work remotely for the foreseeable future, and largely because the crime is so bad. You can't park, you can't walk, you can't go to, if you park your car in the street, it's going to get broken into. If you walk, you're likely to get mugged, or if you can get there at all. Just crossing the street is dangerous because you can't walk on the sidewalks. And so, the federal workers, these are the most privileged workers in the country, right? Let's be honest. They get the solid benefits, good pay, all the various things all of us want. But yet the government can't even protect their own workers in the place that loves the government the biggest, San Francisco. They can't even protect their own workers. And so now, how far down is San Francisco going to have to fall before is it going to become Detroit? I guess is that my question. Is San Francisco going to become Detroit before it has to start rebuilding itself?
Be like Escape New York, we'll just turn it into a penal colony, put walls around. But it's getting there. I mean, there was literally a guy, I can't remember his name, but he did a podcast or a YouTube video, and you can find it out there. Just type all the businesses closed on Market Street, and the guy literally walks down from City Hall, and he just walks down Market Street, and just like, boom, closed shop, closed shop, closed shop. There's a bank that's closed. There's this that's closed. All these different empty buildings with, it's just absolutely bananas that you could have a place that's that iconic of a city. That has that much expensive real estate and all of this real estate being empty.
And that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, San Francisco was one of the most beautiful cities in the world, and now it's a hellhole, and it happened that fast. And now the seeds were laid a long time ago, but once those seeds germinated, it became a hellhole awfully fast.
It's funny though; these things they happen so gradually, I think, and gradually in the sense that we might think of it like if you walked away from a city and you came back in 5 years, you'd think, wow, I can't believe this happened. But if you live there and you see this stuff happen just, over a period of maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 years, it seems relatively gradual. I remember I had, for the work I do, I had to meet with this economist who was coming in from out of town here in Sacramento. And when he showed up at my place of work, his first question he had after coming down our J Street corridor, what happened to your city? That was literally, the guy was coming from Boston or something. And so, and that was his thought as he came down there, because we have all of these vacancy signs all over all these buildings, that it was just sort of like, we gotten used to it.
What happened to our city is that we become a democratic machine city.
Yeah.
And, any place that becomes, and it's not just democratic, any place that becomes a machine, a political machine city, is going to end up eventually as a dump. It just will, because eventually all that stuff is going to catch up with it. So we've got another problem here. A school has gotten upset with a father and accused him of questioning their authority after he corrected the teacher's pronunciation of his daughter's name. And this is just, again, it's one of those things where we've talked about abuse of power, where our schools actually think they have the right to tell you how to pronounce your own name, or how to your daughter pronounce her name, or what medical procedures your children should or shouldn't take, and not bother to tell you. We're losing this sense of what their actual job is to educate the students. Their job isn't to raise them. Their job is to give them a curriculum so they can become educated. It's no wonder to me that our schools are failing our children, and our children are failing their education, when our schools are no longer focused on education. They're focused on anything but education.
Mm-hmm. And least of all, being answerable to the parents. This is the problem with our current system, is that when you put things in the hands of government, I hate to give you a wake-up call if you're out there watching this, but you're not their first interest. Okay. Those politicians, they don't go to bed thinking about you and what your preferences are in life and what your hopes are for your kids. they have their own interests, and you are very, very, very far down on their list of priorities. So, I mean, this is why we have markets. This is why we want competition, because if you choose for yourself, you're going to put a lot more thought into that than some politician who's choosing for you. And we all have different values. And some parents, they want their kids to, be more successful in the arts. Some want their kids to be more successful in STEM. The bottom line is, let the market work. Let parents make choices. And in the end, we'll all get the benefit of seeing what's working out there. And we'll all be able to benefit from the choices others made, instead of just having a shepherd dictate to all of us as sheep where we're going to go.
Well, just remember, it was just a couple of years ago where when someone would lose their job, they say, well, go learn to code. Well, now ChatGPT is coding. So clearly, these people in government and these people who are leaders don't know what they're talking about, right? If you had just spent a couple of years to go learn to code, now all of a sudden you're entering the coding world now, you're out of luck, right? Unless you are an exemplary coder, which means you would have already been doing it, right? You're never gonna catch up to what these 19-year-old kids are doing.
Not only that, 19-year-old kids around the world,
right?
Because you're competing on a world market for some of this stuff.
Yeah, and so the code you were writing is now being written by ChatGPT or something similar. It's actually not written by ChatGPT, but they've got the equivalent of it's now being written by AI and verified and checked by human beings. So unless you can verify and check code, which means you have to know how to write code essentially in your sleep, and you have to be good at it. And so the number of people who are writing code, the point is that these central planners, they have no clue.
Yeah.
There's just not any possible. They did the same thing back when I was a kid. They wanted everybody to become network engineers, and 5 years later, the job of the network engineer was automated. Mm-hmm. And so because technology moved on. The computers were fast enough to do that for us now.
Well, a bigger signal than that is, look at the controversy we're having right now with college debt, and how many people were advised by government and incentivized by government to go and take a loan, and it didn't matter what it was, just follow your dreams. The last I checked, when you go to get a business loan at a bank, they don't just say follow your dreams, take what you need. But when you're making that investment in yourself for college, that is the essentially what's been happening, because government's been underwriting it. And unfortunately, it's led to this massive mountain of college debt that now Biden wants everybody who was able to pay off their college loan because they made good choices, or people who didn't even go to college, they want them paying off the debts of all these other people who made bad choices, in this stuff.
And the universities who got the money already are going to walk away scot-free. The universities, the education system, the people who created the whole problem in the first place will walk away scot-free with a bag of cash. And while us taxpayers are paying for it, or these poor students who are defrauded by the education system, but I think it's fraud. I think they should be suing these schools for fraud, but that's my own kind of opinion. But talk about fraud. We'll move on. The FBI has been caught lying under sworn depositions on this Hunter Biden thing. Essentially, they claimed, we didn't know the Hunter Biden thing was real, but yes, we did know the Hunter Biden thing was real. And so, but is anything going to happen to him? Of course not, right? Nothing ever does, because if we lie to the police, we get charged for the crime. If the police lie to us, nothing happens. If the police lie to themselves, the police lie to government, something's supposed to happen, right? We're supposed to be a nation of laws, and those laws, the difference between the United States and a banana republic is the government is supposed to be accountable to those same laws to the same extent we are. But they're not. If the agents of the government are not accountable to the laws, then the government isn't accountable to the laws.
Well, I think, and these are just the tip of the iceberg, but they're the most visible tip. But you have Julian Assange, and you have Edward Snowden, and both of these guys essentially showed us that the government was lying to us, and they were lying to government as well. You had people like, I believe it was Eric Clapper, who was the head of the NSA or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. He went to Congress and he told them, when they asked him, is the government spying on American citizens? And they said no. And Snowden then spilled the beans and said, yes, they are.
Yes, they are. And then nothing happened.
Nothing happened, but Snowden has had to live in exile in fear for his life, and Assange is now rotting in prison. And both of these men, their crime is telling us that the government lied to us.
Yes, they're being traitors because they expose the government's corruption and lies and crimes. Let's be honest. They expose the government's crimes, and they are being treated like the traitor.
Yeah,
and
the people who did lie, they have big contracts on like MSNBC and CNN to tell us what reality is.
They're working as consultants for these agencies they used to run, and it is just so infuriating for those of us who pay attention to watch all these other people who claim to care about government corruption, but they really don't. They only care about government corruption when it's something they can make a political point out of. That's the only time they care, and it's just so frustrating for the rest of us. So we've got one last thing that's frustrating for the rest of us. Voter groups, most of them currently funded by liberal mega donors, are launching pressure to get Meta to censor election information. They want Facebook, again, to censor. Now, at least in part, these are kind of private companies, private groups. Mm-hmm. Right, they're private groups, and so they're kind of pushing and pressuring these companies to kind of, it's not as bad as the government doing it, but since it's the same activist groups, right? It's the same groups who talk to the same people. It's like an incestuous relationship. It's 1 degree of separation from the government, right? That's kind of the problem.
Well, there's that, and there's also the fact that these businesses, these social media platforms like Facebook and some of the others, certainly YouTube and all these others.
YouTube, X, formerly known as Twitter.
But they essentially are operating under a lot of distortions. They have certain rights that a newspaper doesn't have, so that they are less liable for what they say. But there's also another aspect to some of this too, and it's a little bit of a tangent, but government gives these companies these massive intellectual property rights, and that also distorts the market when you give monopolies to companies. So it makes it hard for new competition to rise up and compete with them. Some of these things, I think we should be a little bit more skeptical about how much we need them as well, because ultimately, we're worried that some of these platforms are too big. Well, part of that is because it's really hard to compete with them, because we've literally said you have a monopoly on some ideas. So.
Yeah, and it's not just a monopoly on the ideas; it's the regulations they put in place that small startup companies can't afford to accommodate, but they can. So when a company like Facebook says, hey, we support these regulations, everybody's ears should be going up. Oh, so yeah, they want their competition. They want it to make it life harder for their competition, which means they can afford to deal with it, but everybody else can't.
Yeah, whenever we hear public-private partnership, all of our radars should be going up.
Yeah, hairs go up on the things, it's like the spidey senses, all that stuff. And we are just about out of time, so we want to thank you, Jason, for being here. We want to thank the crew for working hard in there for us today, and we want to thank you for watching us. So please remember, love everybody, and good night.